Excited to see so many of you still in the seats. I can tell you from firsthand experience that they have saved the best for last. Very excited to be here with Russ Riehl and the Simle Middle School team as we talk a little bit about what they have been doing over the course of not just this last year, but the last several years in order to not just address their students that are experiencing behavior problems, but how they address their entire school community. And so very excited to be here with you and to close out the Innovation Education Summit. But you know, why don't I just turn it over, let you all introduce yourself. If you can give us your name and your role at Simle or the district, that would be great. Russ?
My name is Russ Riehl, and I'm the principal at Simle.
I'm Jessica Nichols, one of the assistant principals at Simle.
Ryan Clark, and I'm band director at Simle.
I'm Rachel Winkler, one of the school counselors at Simle.
I'm Callie Swenson. I am a physical education teacher at Simle.
Jennifer Barnhart, special ed coordinator for Simle.
Megan Sharp, an assistant principal there.
I'm so glad to be on stage with these folks, and one of the things that they're going to be talking about today is how they built their system in Simle. And as they do that, they're coming at this from the frame of reference from the North Dakota multi-tier system of support aspect, and oftentimes we call it MTSS. Governor Burgum this morning, I loved what he monikered it with, MTS. And I thought I think we could use that. We'll keep that around. But it really is a framework to ensure that all students can succeed. They get the best opportunities academically and behaviorally. And so there's a clear focus for the work that happens in schools that are doing this work. Russ, as you have been moving along, one of the things I respect about you so much is you really believe that you can't do this by yourself. Can you talk a little bit about the vision that you have in your school as the leader and how you use a team approach?
Okay, great question. And again, thanks for being here and sticking out this last session this afternoon. Yeah, you know, our school, this is, I just completed my 15th year at Simle. And, you know, it's nothing to really brag about, but I wish I could go and redo the first 10 years at Simle. I really do, because we have learned so much in the past 4 or 5 years since we have embarked on multi-tiered systems of support in our school. And one of the things that I would highly encourage any of you, if you have not, I would really recommend you attending the state MTSS conference coming up in June, again, this next year. That staff development has done more for our school and most importantly for our kids than anything else we've ever done, Luke. So I would really, I don't want to forget that. And as I'm looking at Jennifer sitting right there, I want to make sure that we do a shout out to them. So how we got there was the fact that we were always trying to serve our kids best, but we weren't trying to serve our kids differently. And I think that's really what really started. But it really didn't start with me. It really started with a group of our teachers, assistant principals, and counselors. And that's why it's so awesome to be sitting up here with our staff at different levels of our staff, because this is a collaborative effort and it is a system. We were at a point in our school where we were spending too much time dealing with behaviors, but we were spending even more time doubling down on what didn't work. We were suspending kids. We were citing way too many kids in our school. And I know we've heard a lot through this conference, or maybe more today, about the school-to-prison pipeline, but that's real. It really is. And I want you to know that there is a ton of research out there that indicates that kids that are introduced to the juvenile justice system early are more likely to become adult offenders as well, or continue that path. So we hold a huge responsibility as schools to try other interventions get rid of the consequence stuff. There's still going to be a time and a place for consequences. But keeping in mind interventions of what we can do to help kids and skill kids up. Our old way was hard on teachers. It was hard on administrators. It was hard on kids. It was hard on parents. Nobody won under our old model. And so when our teachers came back fired up, and all they really asked for was some space and some time in the summer to start sketching out some different plans and some different ideas. As an administrator, how can you say no to that? You absolutely cannot say that. And I think that's probably one of there's so many positive things that have happened in our school since that time. But I don't know that I've ever been a part in my years of education, something quite as organic and something quite as sustaining as a multi-tiered systems of support, in particular dealing with behaviors. And we'll talk later today after this presentation about some of the real positive unintended consequences of that work as well. But you know, it's been an exciting journey for all of us to learn together and for all of us to learn off of one another. And honestly, I could have picked dozens of teachers to sit up here with. These aren't just the few people that believe this. These aren't just the few people that bought into this. It really has changed. And we'll share some of our data and some of that stuff with you today as well. So that's kind of how we got started, but it really was thinking of doing differently. And one of the other things, traditionally, those of you who have assistant principals, they are looked at as the disciplinarians in our schools. And our school was no different. But now with this particular system that we have and teaching behaviors and being much more proactive rather than reactive, our assistant principals are spending more time in classrooms and more time in teaming and working about problem solving with kids and helping teachers and coaching teachers. That couldn't have been done under our old model. We just didn't have that capacity. We didn't have that time. So I hope our two APs get a chance to maybe touch on that through this as well.
Yeah, that's so great. And you know, I just want to remind folks, it's been mentioned a couple times over the last day and a half that Simle was chosen by the state to be a pilot for what does behavioral health look like in the school. And really, the work that you've been doing with multi-tier systems of support and how you have pretty adroitly pulled together your academics and behavior was one of the big starting points for why you were chosen. So you mentioned that you could have pulled any teacher here, and we'd hear some of the same things. And I can tell you, we have different people here than some of the last times that this panel has discussed. So I'm excited to hear from the teacher's perspective. So behavior is the deal. We know that if we build relationships, good things will happen. So if behavior is such a key ingredient to student success, what does that look like in the classroom? What does it look like from your perspective? And how do you go about trying to help kids behave? We've heard a lot of different things. So can you tell us at Simle, what does it look like?
So for me in my classroom, and I've got all three grades, so I've got sixth graders, seventh graders, and eighth graders. And for me, within the framework and in the course of the system as a whole, knowing that whatever I want in my classroom, whatever expectations I have in my classroom, how I arrive at that is up to me. So one of the things that as a school, we do a lot of teach-tos. So it's not assuming that students know how to behave in situations or in different parts of our building, but really going through what that looks like. What does that mean? The why we act this way, and really explaining that to the students. And then bringing that into the classroom setting. So my expectations in my class, how I would like to do things, I've changed how I've done that just so that I'm clearer with the students and they can understand what's going on. And then when they don't, we can have that conversation as to why those expectations weren't followed, what was going on, and try to go through that dialogue so that's not just me assuming they know when they don't, and then yelling at them or coming down on them and trying to provide some sort of consequence, but teaching them what that means and what those expectations are, and that it might be different in another classroom. So for me, that with this structure and this idea and this framework has really helped me react differently when situations happen.
Yeah, and I guess in my line of work in physical education, my job is to get the kids up and moving and get energy into them, but we know that some kids are at such a high energy level that their behaviors come out as unproductive. And so I remember, I mean, I'm in my 9th year of teaching now, and before we got into this MTSS, I was so anxious all the time, searching for all these behaviors and constantly putting out fires that my own energy level was probably transferring to them, and theirs was transferring to me, and it was just this toxic classroom when no one probably did anything to cause it. It was just a transfer of energy. So I attended the MTSS conference, not this summer, but last summer, and that's when they started discussing SEL, social emotional learning, and it was just like, that's what I need. So last year at the beginning of the semester, I said, I'm going to take time into the classroom. So I have the kids for 45 minutes in PE, and then I bring them into a classroom for careers. And I said, I'm going to take time to do mindfulness. And so I downloaded an app on my phone called Headspace. Some of you might have had it. It's free for the most part. And I'm like, I'm going to test this out on these kids. And there were some bumps in the road. I mean, it wasn't all rainbows and butterflies by any means, and I had to teach them how to sit quiet, but boy, they started asking for it. And as soon as I gave them permission to just decompress and just lay there for a little bit, it changed the rest, like the next 30, 40 minutes of my class. I wasn't having to put out little fires. I was able to get out the content, and they were able to move. So now I have several things in my toolbox. I know how to get the kids up and moving if I need to, and I also know how to decompress them when I need to. So it's changed the way I teach. It's changed my energy level. I use the same skills in mindfulness and physical education that I teach the kids. It's been awesome, and to have the permission to do it is powerful.
So that makes sense. So you're building this system. You're thinking through how can we do this for all kids. The teachers have some autonomy in their classroom for how they can make this work, and there's expectations that are clear. So that fixed all the behavior problems, right? You guys don't have any more severe behavior problems.
All gone.
All gone. Yeah, right. So I got to know, from a counselor's point of view, in a lot of schools, the counselor kind of bears the burden of how can we deal with these kids that have some pretty severe behavioral issues. So how has your role changed as there's been a more positive approach in proactive prevention? What's your role? What does it look like now?
Well, we've been able to work much more effectively as school counselors in a role. This is my 8th year at Simle, and when I first started, we were kind of the go-to for every intervention, whether it be check-in, check-out, or working with students individually. I would try to do it all, because who has the time to do that, right? And we have that time and flexibility. So we would try to do those interventions on our own, and that's when they failed, they didn't work. So instead, we made a shift that we train others in our building on how to do those interventions, so that we as counselors can coach and work more effectively with kind of our tier 3 kids, or those that need it the most. Like she mentioned, the teachers are doing that social and emotional learning at the tier 1 level. We have trained aides and other people in the building to do check-in connect and check-in check-out. So it's a team effort in helping kids, and it's not just the school counselor. So we can be more productive in our work, and it's all about building relationships, and I feel like I can do that more and work more one-on-one with the kids that need it the most. And we follow them 3 years, so I enjoy that part too. I get to build that relationship 3 years, and it's been a team effort, which helps a lot.
So you can really follow through with all of those kids as they're going through the system for 3 years, a pretty big transitional part of their lives. You talked about check-in, check-out, and check-in connect. For those in the audience that maybe don't know what that is, can you just let us know what that looks like?
So check-in, check-out really works for those students who want that adult attention. That's the key thing they need. When we're problem solving with teams, if that seems like that's what they're trying to achieve by their behavior, we start there. It doesn't always work for every student, but it's worth a try, and it has worked. I had one student as an 8th grade last year. He was on check-in, check-out all 3 years of middle school, but it's what he needed to be successful. And we have an aide that does that just because she's there every morning and every day after school, which is when they check in and check out with that individual. So they go in the morning and get their point sheets. The goal is tailored to what they may need, and then they get points throughout the day from their teachers. So they get that positive feedback throughout the day, and then we kind of review to see if that's working or not. They have to be responsible too, so another factor that has to be there, they need to be responsible enough to take around that sheet. So it's not for every kid, but it does work for a handful of our students. And then CheckIn Connect is basically having that adult mentor just take 20 minutes a week or twice a week out of their day and go through their academics, things at home. You know, there's some things that we go through with that, but it's basically having a mentor for that student. It started as a dropout prevention program to basically get kids to stay in school and have something to look forward to be at school, to have that adult have their back. So again, and that's not just us. We have our CheckIn Connect caseloads, but there are others in the building that take a handful too.
So really an opportunity for these kids to develop some pretty meaningful relationships with an adult in the building who will check in with them at the beginning of the day and set some goals, and then check back in again at the end of the day and say, how did we do? Where did we end? Seemingly a pretty simple intervention that can be applied to, like you said, some kids. We heard earlier this morning from Dr. Ablon that sometimes there are things that work for some kids and don't work for other kids. So, you know, I want to just think about this because we've got some behavioral specialists in the audience today, and a lot of times assessments can take a very long time when we start talking about some of these more difficult behaviors. So we're lucky enough to have one of the district psychs on board here today. Can you tell us a little bit, how has the job changed of the school psychologist in terms of, you know, like, are there still just tons of assessments and that's all we're doing is testing kids and sending them to the next thing? Are we just IEPing all day long? Tell me a little bit about this.
So we were fortunate enough last year we had a new school psychologist to Simle, and just with the work that everybody here had already done, there really isn't a divide between general education and special education. Everything at Simle kind of starts with like, well, what does this kid need? And then you start having the conversation. So our school psychologist has really found herself in more of a facilitative role. And because everybody has ownership in student success, she's able to do more facilitation through that problem-solving process where she's helping teams brainstorm what skills does a kid need to learn, what kind of supports need to be in place, how do we support you as a school team to make all of that happen. And I think the end result is that she probably does spend less time doing those formal assessments because she's really working with facilitating that team approach initially. And then as students move through those tiers of supports or we try certain things and something's not working, we're still gathering information that whole entire time. So by the time that student rises to tier 3, we've already got a solid base of information about that student and what we have tried and what their skill deficits would be. So then she's not doing a whole battery of standardized assessments. She's able to really focus in on, you know, where are the gaps in our information, and she's able to work more effectively with teams that way.
That makes a lot of sense. And Russ, you were talking about how sometimes it's the assistant principal's job to take care of the discipline in the school. And we heard this morning, you just talked about skills and how we get kids the skills they need. So I know that Bismarck Public uses the FBA process. They use something called Prevent, Teach, Reinforce, and really do it at a pretty phenomenal level. And so Dr. Ablon said it's not that it doesn't work, but there's a lot of skills that really have to get utilized. So from your perspective as assistant principals that get to deal with the discipline, right? Can you tell us a little bit about how do you go about getting those skills built up?
So it really is a team effort in trying to figure out why students are behaving the way they are. The skills do come into play, and we do use the PTR and the FBA process, and it does work for some. And I think the part that works is when a team of teachers are sitting around a table and asking questions of how can I help this child, why are they behaving this way, and then trying to collaborate and make it better for them, their education. So. I've been at Simle for 11 years, and I joke that Russ has hired me 4 different times. I started as an aide there, I was a teacher, and then twice I had to interview for the assistant principal job, because then I needed another interview for that second one there. So I've been there a long time, and I remember being part of the system where I didn't know what my assistant principal was doing if I submitted a log entry as far as if I felt as a teacher the behavior had gotten to an extreme level. So what happened, I don't know. I don't know if there was a consequence. I don't know if it was my job to consequence the student. And we've really cleaned up that process of what's my job, what's your job, and how can we all work together to make that student's education better.
So that makes a lot of sense, and you guys have done a lot of work to figure this out. I mean, if you got to get hired 4 times, there's a lot of work being done to get...
I haven't figured out hiring yet, but no, I'm just kidding.
So I want to come back to the classroom perspective. So from the office, they make it sound pretty easy. Like, the system's been built, we got it figured out, no problem. But you've done some work. You talked a little bit about expectations. So can you tell us, I'd love to hear 2 things. Number one, tell us a little bit about what expectations are. I think you call them something pretty specific. And then after that, tell us what happens with those kids that don't meet the expectations in pretty severe ways. What happens? What's it like in the classroom?
So within the classroom and within my classroom, those expectations, depending on what we do or depending on that moment, just that set of guidelines or the way that we need to do something to complete a task. So if it's us taking our instruments outside, how we move through the halls to get outside to the street to go marching so that nobody trips and falls and those kinds of things too, just the treatment of each other. Within the process, the tier 1, teaching the students those things, those expectations, and then when they don't follow it, helping them understand that this is what it is that they didn't do or could have done differently to make it better. And we've changed we've got our Spartan 5, we've got our Spartan 5 rocks, and just some key words, key phrases, and things like that the kids can kind of hold on to and grasp that. Allow them for us to say, hey, remember that. We've got posters around the school, and Megan was I saw this last week, adding more to some certain areas throughout the building, just to kind of help with some of those, to clean up some of those, and help the students so that they're always seeing those posted in our classrooms. And then with it, it's always tier 1. It's if this is not working for that student, and I need that to change in the classroom because of the classroom situation itself, for whatever reason it is, then I have to help that student. They obviously need something else. And like we've talked, it's not a one size that fits all, so we've got to figure something out with that student. And so for me, it's helped me react differently to those students. Like, okay, this is obviously not working. They're not getting it. So what can I do differently, whether it's my own reaction to it or how I respond to that student. And then knowing that there's a whole tier in place of a bunch of different ideas that we can try, but then there's a lot of other people that work with that student on a regular basis that may have ideas as well. So that working together piece really comes in there as well.
Yeah. So basically what you're saying is every teacher has the opportunity to dive into these same concepts, these same principles, so that it's extremely consistent for all of the kids. Yeah. So, okay, you said that it didn't fix all the behaviors. There's still some behaviors. You said you were going to share some data, too. So let's find out really what kind of changes happened. You got more positive. You got more preventive. You started getting consistent with everyone. You're teaching skills. You're working towards these FBAs. So when you start wrapping all of that together in a system, what's the outcome? What'd you see?
So when we first started with the MTSS process and really kind of coming to a consistent behavior management throughout the whole building, so we knew exactly if a student's in the hallway, what are the expectations in the hallway? What is every adult going to say to that student if they aren't following those expectations that are posted? Prior to that, having those expectations posted in the hallway, Megan kind of referred to a teacher might put a log entry in. And then that log entry goes to the assistant principal, and we're supposed to do something with that log entry for that student so that they have a consequence. Now that has shifted a little bit where students who maybe aren't exhibiting that behavior in the hallway, like Ryan said, teachers will have a conversation with them. If their conversation isn't maybe sufficient enough, that's when teachers will take it kind of into their own hands to write what we call a student incident report with that student. The student knows kind of what expectation it is they need to follow, how they didn't follow it, and they'll try to correct it that way. So it really has, when we talk about data, it really has increased, or decreased, I'm sorry, the number of log entries that the office is to handle, and really kind of put that back on us as a whole building to take responsibility for that. So now teachers know that every teacher, no matter who you are, where you are, this is a process that we follow. So, you know, teachers sometimes think like, well, that gives me more work. And it maybe does give a little bit more work on the front end, because now we're doing a lot more teach twos in our whole building. Everyone, Megan is gracious enough to put teach twos on everyone's calendar so you can't forget to do your teach twos. So everyone that day might talk about the cafeteria. What are the expectations in the cafeteria? Students know, teachers know exactly what those expectations are. So just the teach twos alone, along with those student incident reports and teachers having that conversation with the students. Ryan referred to that earlier, and we call that stop, question, and redirect. Stop the students, question what they're doing, and then redirect them to the proper behavior. That has really decreased the number of incidents throughout our building as a whole.
One thing I would add to that, Luke, is that was a culture shift for our teachers early on. That wasn't something that came easily to them or to us as an administrative staff. Our teachers were used to, you know, if kids were sent to the office, they may not have seen them for the rest of that day, and you know, depending on what happened, they may not have seen them for a couple more days. And that thinking has shifted, you know, because in the past, and I was this way as a teacher, I don't know what we expected if we'd send a kid to the office, you know, to come back like wounded or whatever, but we just expected something to happen, and now that's different. So teachers, we all have to be on the same page and understand that, you know, we have 90-minute blocks. So, you know, if a kid, you know, needs to be SQR'd and maybe a couple of times, they might be back at the end of that period. But at the end of the day, it's about keeping these kids in school, in class. These kids that we're talking about throughout the day today, they're not the kids that can be suspended and sent home and just figure this out. They're missing some skills, and our job is to help teach those skills. And sometimes we have to backfill those skills depending on the age of the kid and what they've been through. But having that conversation with teachers, and teachers who are willing to take some chances, and there has to be some trust amongst the teaching staff and amongst administration and amongst the staff. So that didn't just happen because we went to the MTSS conference. And we had some days that it was not, you know, it was icky, you know, but we're past that. And I think you have to have that type of buy-in from, again, I said it earlier, from the lunchroom to the hallways, to the tutors, to the paras, to the secretaries. Everyone in that building has to have that same understanding of how to handle behaviors. And then the other thing I would just kind of add on, I know we have more questions, but when you think about early adolescence, any of us who have had middle school kids of our own, how many times do you have to tell them to do something? I mean, not just once. That's really what this is. It's that constant cueing and reminding kids, whether it's through a sign, whether it's through telling them, and telling them at the beginning of class, the end of class, and as they get on the bus, the same thing. And these are all kids, not just our behavior kids. They have to have those reminders. So the more we can do, when we just think about adolescent development, this isn't new stuff. This has been around since early adolescents have been around, so.
Yeah, you know, and so you said it was a hard journey. You're changing culture, and earlier today we heard if you're going to start to change culture, then staff need to have buy-in and belief, and climate has to change, and there's a lot that goes into it. But it has paid off. I'd love to flash up some of your data so that folks can see what some results are. And so can you just kind of walk us through? So it could be that there's a lot of changes happening that you haven't talked about yet. I know that you utilize restorative practices. So can you just tell us, what does this data mean to you, and where do you think, why? Why did it happen?
Russ is right when he said it's been hard. It's easy to sit up here and talk about it, but what you don't see is the day-to-day conversations, the one-on-ones that we have with teachers, the work that we're doing as teams. So you can see the decrease, and this is what we call ODRs, which would be office discipline referrals, so major incidents, things like fighting, maybe swearing inappropriately at an adult, but big things in a classroom. And so these are things that Jess and I would deal with directly. When you look at our 14-15 data, we had a little over 800 students in our school, and right now we have over 1,000 students. So our number is staying the same or kind of decreasing. A lot of that 238 from this last year was repeat offenders. So it's not 238 different students. It's maybe 2 of those students accounted for 40 of those referrals. So as we've said, it doesn't work for everyone. We do have other interventions that only a select few students are nominated and chosen for by their teams. One of those interventions is Taekwondo, and that is working directly on self-discipline, regulating yourself, and we have a Taekwondo instructor that comes in from a local agency, and he works with our boys, specifically boys, because that number is a lot of boys. And so he does that with a group of 10 to 12 boys. They come out of their core classes, and teachers are understanding because they trust us. They trust the system that this is what they need more than maybe that content. Other things our teachers have done is pair the reading class. When we need a student that has a reading intervention and a math intervention, we don't want them not to have electives. So they pair their reading class with social studies and science. So now I'm getting less social studies and science, but I'm getting my reading and I'm getting my 2 electives. So there's still that movement piece. There's still my choice built into there. Restorative justice has always been a big part of our school. Even when I was a teacher, we have Michelle Dyer, who works with us from the United Way, and Jess and I will make referrals for big things and little things. Big things like fights, little things like girls talking about one another and we just can't get it figured out, and we keep talking about one another, and it's interfering with our education. So that looks like the 2 parties sitting down willingly and creating a contract and an agreement to move forward and be together in school.
I like how nice you put some of the interactions, you know, girls just not talking nice about each other. I have a feeling it maybe goes a little beyond that. But I appreciate you putting a bow on it for us.
You're welcome.
Yeah. So okay, you're sharing so much with us, and we've heard some today. You know, this FBA process is kind of a special ed process, but you're building it into more than just special ed, and you've said that this is for all kids. So can you share a little bit? And tell us, how has it changed for the special ed staff in your building? Because if this is for all kids, that's got to shift something.
Yeah, I work in multiple buildings in the district, so it is interesting to see the shift in dynamics between, and it does go back to that climate and culture and the team effort that's been created. You don't have that sense that the case manager has to figure it out. a lot of times our special education case managers are going into teams and working with the entire team of teachers to help problem solve things. So it's never just, well, who's the kid's case manager? Let's email them and have them call the parent or deal with it, or they didn't get these assignments done. It may be that teacher coming to the case manager and saying, I need your support with this, or can you help me find a new way to do this, or go about doing it. I think the other thing that has really kind of been blurred is doing interventions. Like you guys have talked about, our gym teachers are doing interventions, our social studies teachers are doing interventions. We have aides who are really passionate about and interested in some of these components of social emotional learning, and they're taking the lead and taking charge on it. So again, it's kind of the same thing with the school psych. Our case managers get to be more of that facilitator. And from an administrative standpoint, I think we spend more time building our capacity instead of reacting to things that have happened. And when it comes to an FBA, we're trying not to do so many FBAs, but we are trying to skill up the people around us in thinking functionally. So then it's going back to what skills does that student need to learn? Are there things in the environment that we can change that would just automatically make them more successful and more likely to be able to engage in that learning? And then how do we just support each other in the process? Like I said, it's every conversation that I have around specific kids, and if I'm there, it's usually those very few top tier 3 kids. It always starts with, okay, what do we know and what does this kid need? And then we go from there.
Just remarkable. I mean, as you kind of describe what you're doing and what Dr. Ablon started off this morning with, really pairing skills together with systems that you have in place so that you can ensure every kid is getting what they're needing. So I'm going to jump off script a little bit, Russ, and this may cause some issues because we don't have a lot of time left, but you talked earlier about this partnership that you had, and we've heard about this partnership with a local Taekwondo, and you rattled off about 5 different partnerships, but tell us a little bit about, okay, so if we know that behavior affects all of these kids and they're not all on IEPs, how do you use partnerships to help you with the students?
That's a great question, and I'm always leery to mention partners because I'm afraid I'm going to miss someone when I say those things. But, it really just starts with conversations, and one of the things that you heard me speak of earlier is relationships, but we as the adults also need to facilitate and nurture those relationships as well. And really that's what this whole process has been, is listening to your staff, listening to your kids, and then finding what do we need, what do we need to bring in, and I'll just give you a couple of examples. We our nutrition department partnered with the Play 60 and the Midwest Dairy Council, so we now have a breakfast bar in our school every morning. In addition to breakfast, so kids could still get breakfast in the cafeteria, but during their advisory period or their home-based period, they can grab a reimbursable meal if a student is on free and reduced, or they can do it a la carte. And we are feeding anywhere between 240 and 300 plus kids every day breakfast that might not sound like a lot, and I don't have a slide to show you the compelling data of that, but I can tell you this year there's been a couple of times when we had late starts with storms or whatever, when we didn't have a breakfast bar, and the comment you got from teachers was, those kids are hungry. Those kids are hungry. So it makes a difference. We don't have data to say that the kids who are eating breakfast are not popping up on any behavior. So that's one thing. The other piece is with our partnership with Pam and DHS and Chris and their folks was through our grant, we have really, as I stated earlier, tried to find some practices and some tier 1s that we could share with other schools in our district and throughout the state. And I'm going to kick it over to our Callie here in just a second with our physical education. And we did some things with mindful yoga. And one of the reasons I selected that, because when you think of tier 1, as an administrator or policymakers who are in here, how much is this going to cost? Okay? So that's number 1. But number 2, what do we already have that we could just build upon? And for us, that was a great place because every school district in North Dakota has a physical education teacher. Kids have to take PE. Our PE teachers are generally pretty good relationship people, and most of our teachers are good relationship people. But so if we can skill that person, so whether you're in a small K-12 school of 200, who maybe you see all 200 kids, that same person will be that constant. In our building, all of our kids take physical education, so I can go to my school board, I can go to my parents and say all of my kids are getting this. So you have to find those pieces in your building where those efficiencies are already there, and then invest in your people. Skill up your people. I would much rather put my money in these folks than on stuff. These guys get it. And our teachers, you give them a little, and man, it's incredible what they do with it, and they're appreciative of it. So I'll talk about my partnership with Stanford here in just a bit as well, but I'm going to kick it over to Callie to talk a little bit about the yoga.
Yeah, so last spring, one of the physical education teachers recruited in a trainer to come to Bismarck, so that was probably where the cost came in, and ended up training between 30 to 40 physical education teachers around our district and even around the state. So it was a 2-day class. We even got a credit for it, which was great. But we got to bring these skills back into our classroom. This particular training wasn't just becoming a yoga certified teacher, but specifically in mindfulness. She taught us ways to bring it into a classroom itself where you don't have a big gym. Different breathing techniques, which I used in the classroom, even after physical education or before. Even on myself, I think I just taught you one when we were sitting there. I mean, they're just powerful. So again, it's managing energy, whether it's getting energy high or getting energy back down low. We have a physical education teacher in the building who does a morning program for kids who come in early just to burn off some steam right away. They can run and they can play. And we're starting another one here this year before and after school for about 30, 40 minutes or so of mindfulness. For the kids who might not want the loud gym noise type of area, who just kind of want to have a low-key, chill area. But it's also perfect timing for us to connect with a small group of kids and just get some positive feedback and get a good start to their day so that they come into school a little bit less energized, anxious than how they started or came off the bus or out of the classroom. So it's powerful for us because as they said that when we have, like I was a teacher who used to say, if you swear at me, you're gone. Like I was that teacher, and my emotional capacity couldn't handle if a kid was just was misbehaving either. So through all of the processes, I mean, I'm much more apt to take a kid in to handle if they swear at me or if they misbehave, to ask, hey, what did, they say, can I go see the counselor? I say, well, have you, I know if they've seen the counselor before. Well, what has the counselor told you before that you can put into practice now? And so make them think about it. Can they use skills that they've already learned and put them into real time? I don't prevent them from seeing them by any means, but I say, can what you already know help you now, or do you really need to go see them? So, and the same thing with the principals. If they're having a cat fight of some kind, well, what can I help? Can I help you fix it now? And so I'm much more empowered as a teacher to help deal with it at my level versus constantly referring it to other adults and then make them bring it back so that they can apply the skills that they probably already have in their toolbox and apply them on site. So.
Great, thanks, Callie. And then the other partnership, as I talked before, is we're excited with our partnership with Stanford, and I think that has been one of the best outcomes of this work. When we started this years ago, we never thought we would be here at a point where we're talking about clinicians, behavioral health services in schools, and all those. We're here. And the nice thing about that is we have captured that data, we've captured that thinking, those resources, the interventions, and now we have, through the work of some of the folks here and some of the people that couldn't make it today, we've worked with a gating system on how to access those services in our school. We're trying to be extremely transparent with our staff, so if someone calls me or someone calls Rachel, someone calls Megan, they're going to get the same response of how do we access those services. And really, in a nutshell, we're going to talk about teacher nomination. So teachers nominate kids that they're seeing that maybe are demonstrating some internalizing behaviors, and we give them a list of behaviors as cues to look at. That goes to the team. After the team gets that, they'll act on that. So if we see that this kid is not just maybe suffering in one class or struggling in one class, there's multiple classes, those students will then get a DESA from our school psych. We bring parents in, start that process. Upon that information, those students will then be referred to our clinician. And in doing that work with our clinician, we will be then wanting to work with staff, on some of these tougher kids and circle back and share some of that information. So the partnerships have been incredible. And I can honestly tell you this, is not one person has said no. Because this isn't just a school thing, it's a community thing, it's where we are. And I think we need to be resourceful, we need to be smart, we need to be efficient, but we also need to learn and learn from each other.
Russ, that's just such a great sentiment and an excellent way to kind of wrap up what we've been talking about all day today. So I'd like to thank all of you for all of the work that you do. And if I may, on behalf of the governor's office, thank you for being here and sharing what you're doing. It really is an honor to hear about your work. Folks, let's hear it for Simle Middle School.
Thank you.